Night sky was plunged into darkness when Sergeant James Carter received an urgent call. The small town of Pineville, known for its tranquility, was about to be haunted by an event that shook even the bravest hearts. Upon arriving at the scene, James and his partner, Detective Sarah Brooks, came across a macabre scene. The address they were given was 43 Elm Street, a quiet, tree-lined street that had never seen so much hustle and bustle. The Victorian-style houses seemed to hide dark secrets beneath their well-kept facades. With the police car parked in front of an abandoned mansion, the two officers exchanged a worried look before exiting the vehicle. An icy wind whispered through the trees and made dry leaves dance across the asphalt. It was a perfect night for the unknown. James Carter adjusted the brim of his cap, and Sarah Brooks checked her gun magazine before they approached the mansion. The mansion was shrouded in darkness, with broken windows and a dark aura emanating from its walls. The shadows seemed to move and whisper secrets to anyone who approached. The neighbors, gathered outside, looked on with fearful expressions, whispering among themselves. With flashlights in hand and pistols ready, James and Sarah entered the decrepit mansion. The smell of mold and decay filled their noses as they explored the interior. The floor creaked beneath his feet, and each step echoed through the dark, cobwebbed hallways. As they advanced, a sense of apprehension grew. A series of old portraits, with serious faces and empty eyes, adorned the walls. The shadows cast by the extinguished candles in the candelabra seemed to dance, as if the house's former inhabitants still roamed the halls. Finally, they arrived at a solid wooden door. It was partially open, and a faint reddish light escaped through the cracks. Cautiously, they pushed the door open, revealing a scene that left them speechless. A large, messy room stood before them, and what caught their attention the most was the profusion of antique dolls, arranged in a macabre way. Some hanging from the ceiling, others stacked on broken chairs, all looking old and spooky. Some had glass eyes that seemed to follow the officer's every move, while others had twisted wire hair and disfigured faces. Sarah shivered and looked at James. He was also visibly distraught. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a sinister energy, as if the dolls were sentinels of a dark secret. As they explored the room, James noticed a letter, folded and dusty, next to the dolls. He took it with shaking hands and began to read. The handwriting was irregular, written in red ink, and the words were disturbing. The doll's curse will be their death. Sarah looked at James with wide eyes, and the uneasiness they felt turned into pure terror. What they had discovered in that room was more than a macabre scene. It was the beginning of a nightmare. "This can't be real, right?" whispered Sarah, unable to look away from the dolls that seemed to be watching them. James, trying to remain calm, replied, "We don't know what we're dealing with here, but one thing is for sure, we need to investigate this further. Let's get out of here and call for backup, as well as an expert in supernatural cases. This is beyond our common jurisdiction." The two officers left the room and closed the door behind them. As they returned to the light of night, the sense of relief was palpable. But the red note and the macabre dolls continued to haunt his thoughts. Pineville was about to be plunged into a darkness that not even James and Sarah could imagine. With the macabre note in hand, James and Sarah returned to the Pineville police station. Their co-workers' curious gazes fell on them. They needed answers, and fast. The first task was to find out who lived in that abandoned house and why so many macabre dolls had been left there. A search of official records indicated that the property had been abandoned for decades, with no registered owner. It seemed impossible for anyone to gain access to it. Determined to solve the mystery, James and Sarah decided to turn to an expert in local folklore and superstitions. Dr. Samuel Walker, a forensic anthropologist known for his expertise in supernatural cases, was called in hastily. Dr. Walker, a middle-aged man with thick-rimmed glasses, listened intently to the description of events and examined the red note. He seemed intrigued, though not completely convinced that they were dealing with something supernatural. "The legend of the curse of the dolls is an old tale in Pineville," Dr. Walker explained. "They say a witch lived in that house a long time ago, a witch who used dolls to cast spells on those who defied her. But honestly, I always considered it a local story made up to scare children." As he spoke, a stack of old family journals that belonged to the house were brought to his attention. James and Sarah had found them during their investigation of the mansion. Dr. Walker leafed through the diaries, with old handwritten letters that told the story of the house's former residents. In addition to mundane details of the family's life, there were obscure references to mysterious rituals and the presence of a witch known as Margaret. The diaries insinuated that Margaret was the family matriarch and that she had conducted sinister rituals in the house. Margaret was a woman known for her passion for black magic and witchcraft, Dr. Walker explained. But there are no concrete records of her activities. This could be a simple coincidence, or perhaps, well, the story of the legend of the witch Margaret may have some basis in reality. The clues were falling into place, but the truth remained hidden in the shadows. As they explored the witch's diaries and history, the peculiar doll James had found in the mansion continued to haunt their thoughts. Something needed to be done. That night, under Dr. Walker's guidance, the three decided to return to the abandoned mansion in search of more clues. This time, Dr. Walker brought with him a specialized apparatus for detecting paranormal activity, a device he rarely used but considered necessary under the circumstances. The trio ascended to the dusty attic, where the air was filled with heavy, oppressive energy. There, they found a macabre altar, decorated with lit candles and dolls stacked in a bizarre manner. In the center of the altar was the peculiar doll that James had found on his first visit. Dr. Walker turned on his device, which began making a series of strange noises. The lights flickered intermittently as he investigated the altar. The doll seemed to have a sinister aura, and the atmosphere in the room was electrically charged. Sarah touched the peculiar doll, and a shiver ran down her spine. James noticed a slight tremor in Dr. Walker's device, indicating paranormal activity. However, before they could react, the doll came to life before their eyes. Its glass eyes began to glow with an ominous red light, and the doll began to utter words in an unknown language. Dr. Walker tried to touch the doll, but an electric shock hit him, causing him to fall to the floor, unconscious. Sarah and James, in shock, tried to approach the doll to stop it. However, she jumped from the surface of the altar and fled through the window, breaking the glass. With the doll's sudden disappearance, Dr. Walker's device stabilized, as if the paranormal energy had disappeared along with the doll. Bewilderment gripped James and Sarah as they tended to Dr. Walker. What they had witnessed was unbelievable, and the mystery of the dolls had deepened even further. Pineville was about to discover that ancient legends could hide terrifying secrets, and that facing the supernatural was inevitable. With Dr. Walker unconscious, James and Sarah found themselves in a terrifying situation. The peculiar doll, which seemed to have a life of its own, had escaped through the attic window, and they were faced with a choice: flee the house or continue the dangerous investigation they had started. The sense of duty and the need to understand what was happening drove them to move forward. They decided to pursue the doll as it seemed to hold the key to unlocking the mystery behind the doll's curse. They ran through the dark streets of Pineville, with their flashlights lighting the way as the doll guided them with a mysterious purpose. The city was enveloped in silence, as if the environment itself was conspiring to hide dark secrets. There was no sign of life except for a few stray cats who watched the chase with menacing eyes. The peculiar doll continued to move in a sinister and evasive manner, as if aware of the pursuit. She entered dark alleys and narrow alleys, always out of reach of the police. It seemed impossible that a doll could be so agile and intelligent. Finally, the chase led James and Sarah into the woods near town. The tall, dense trees cast dark shadows across the path, and the only light came from their lanterns. The air was damp and filled with a feeling of oppression. In the heart of the forest, the doll entered a dark cave. It was an eerie, dark place, with stalactites hanging from the ceiling, dripping water, and echoing disturbing sounds. The atmosphere in the cave seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy. James and Sarah exchanged worried looks, but determination drove them to continue. With cautious steps, they entered the cave, with their flashlights lighting the way. Every sound seemed magnified in the darkness, creating a sense of unease that spread through his bones. Deep inside the cave, they found a macabre altar, similar to the one they had seen in the abandoned mansion. Lighted candles cast a dim light, and dolls were piled up, forming a bizarre structure. In the center of the altar stood the peculiar doll, its glass eyes shining with an evil light. "This can't be real," Sarah muttered, shaking with fear. James looked at the doll and, with shaking hands, tried to get closer to her. But before he could reach it, the doll came to life once again. Her glass eyes glowed brightly, and she began to utter words in an ancient and sinister language. The cave shook, as if it was reacting to the doll's words. Sarah was thrown backwards, injuring herself in the process. James struggled to maintain his balance and move toward the doll, but the energy emanating from it was overwhelming. Dr. Walker, who was still unconscious in the cave, began to twitch and moan. James realized that the doll's presence was affecting the expert in folklore and supernatural activities. It was a battle of supernatural forces beyond his understanding. With fierce determination, James finally managed to approach the doll. The energy around him was almost unbearable, but he ignored the pain and apprehension and took it. The doll began to shake, and its red light intensified. James had no choice but to act. He pulled out his gun and shot the doll, which burst into red flames. The cave shook again, and the floor began to crack. Sarah ran towards James, and the two managed to escape the cave moments before it collapsed. The moonlight shone over the forest, and the darkness of the cave had been sealed. They looked back, seeing the altar and the doll destroyed by the flame. The doll's curse seemed to have been sealed, but the mystery behind Margaret, the witch, and the origin of the curse still remained unanswered. James and Sarah knew the investigation was far from over. They tended to Dr. Walker, who finally woke up, confused and weak. What they witnessed in that cave had defied rational explanation, and the town of Pineville was destined to face a nightmare beyond their understanding. The curse of the dolls had been stopped, but the dark legends surrounding it remained a terrifying enigma. After the destruction of the doll in the cave and the collapse of the altar, the sense of relief between James, Sarah, and Dr. Walker was almost tangible. The nightmare they had faced seemed to have come to an end, but they knew that the investigation had not yet been completed. Pineville still held secrets and mysteries that cried out for answers. They cared for Dr. Walker, who, although shaken, was determined to help them understand what they had faced. The expert on folklore and supernatural activities was perplexed, but his experience told him that they had dealt with something undeniably evil. "This goes beyond local legends and superstitions," Dr. Walker said. "The witch, Margaret, the curse of the dolls. There seems to be a basis in reality. We must continue investigating to discover the truth." James and Sarah agreed with Dr. Walker. They returned to the Pineville police station, where the silence that had enveloped the town was beginning to dissipate. Residents were waking up from the nightmare that had held them captive, but many eyes were full of questions. What had happened in that abandoned house? The team began interviewing neighbors, collecting accounts of the events that had occurred in the mansion. Some admitted to hearing strange screams and noises during the night, but few knew anything about the house's occupants. The abandoned mansion was a mystery that the city preferred to ignore, until the curse of the dolls dragged them into the abyss of the unknown. James and Sarah delved into old family diaries they found in the house, looking for clues about the witch Margaret and the sinister rituals. Although the records were vague and often illegible, they began to understand that the witch's story might have some basis in reality. Margaret's story was intertwined with witchcraft and dark practices that were disturbing. Dr. Walker focused on investigating the local legend of the doll's curse. He spoke to the city's oldest residents, collecting stories and legends passed down from generation to generation. It became clear that the curse of the dolls was not just an invention to scare children. It was a deeply rooted part of Pineville's history, shrouded in secrets and fears. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that something terrible had happened in that abandoned house, something beyond human comprehension. They felt they had only scratched the surface of what was happening. The town of Pineville was about to discover that the true story of Margaret and the curse of the dolls was scarier than any legend could suggest. However, before they could further their investigation, a series of strange events began to occur in the city. The stray cats who witnessed the dolls' chase began to gather on the outskirts of the abandoned mansion. Residents have reported having vivid and disturbing nightmares where scary dolls chased them. The nights were filled with strange noises and unsettling whispers. James, Sarah, and Dr. Walker realized that the doll's curse was not yet completely sealed. Something, or someone, was trying to resurrect the evil they had faced. Urgently, they returned to the abandoned mansion, ready to destroy any trace of what was left of the curse. When they arrived at the house, they found the stray cats gathered in the yard, as if they were waiting for them. The cats' eyes glowed with a mysterious light. This time, when they entered the house, the darkness was more intense than ever. The atmosphere was permeated with an evil presence. They advanced down the hallway, determined to reach the attic, where the curse seemed to be strongest. As they climbed the dusty stairs, the sounds of the house came to life. Whistling whispers echoed through the halls, and shadows seemed to twist and dance. The old diaries were gone, as if the evil that inhabited the house was playing with them. Finally, they reached the attic, where the macabre altar and dolls had been destroyed on the first visit. However, the altar had been rebuilt, and the dolls were arranged in an even more sinister manner. In the center of the altar stood the peculiar doll. Its presence was more oppressive than ever. Her glass eyes glowed a fiery red, and she began to utter ancient words in a chilling language. Sarah fought to remain calm and wielded her gun, while James and Dr. Walker were determined to destroy the altar and put an end to the curse once and for all. They advanced, facing the supernatural energy that seemed to challenge them. With a combined effort, they tore down the altar and burned the dolls. The peculiar doll let out a high-pitched scream before crumbling into ashes. The cave in which the curse had been sealed shook, as if evil itself was being defeated. They escaped the house, running as it shook and seemed to writhe in agony. The abandoned mansion finally collapsed, leaving behind only ruins. The sense of relief they felt was palpable, but they knew that the fight against the doll's curse had come to an end. Pineville was finally free from the nightmare,